Welcome to a special edition of Crawford County Outdoors. I'm Duane Kohler. Maybe you can guess that's French Creek behind us here. Brenda Costa from the French Creek
Valley Conservancy.
Thank you for being with us here today. So
glad to be.
I'm guessing that is French Creek over there,
That
right?
is French Creek. It certainly is.
Well, where are we right now?
Right now, we are actually south of Sagertown. This is the McGuffin Town Bridge in the background, and French Creek Valley Conservancy owns the property across the creek. That's our Loofers Landing property.
Let me ask you about, so we have a lot of fishermen, hunters that like to watch the show. Conservancy, does that mean it's a bad thing for me to get a deer once in a while, or for me to get a duck or a bird or a mammal?
It does not, and that's something that we always want to clear up with the sportsman community. We're not talking about not using land or not having opportunity to get out on a property. What we want to prevent on property is overdevelopment. Our properties, some of them are open to hunting and fishing and access for people to utilize them, so in no way do we want conservation to sound like a bad term to outdoorsmen. We want to invite people to use the properties that we have in the outdoors.
So what does it mean when French Creek Conservancy manages a property or owns a property? What does that mean?
All right, so that property, the Loofers Landing property, was donated to us in 1996. It's about a 3-acre property, and what this means, we own this property outright, and we will steward this property forever into the future. We will make sure that there is no adverse development on that property forever. So we're protecting that. That's an important part of the creek because that's what we call a riparian buffer. That's an area where there's lots of trees, a lot of vegetation, and it's protecting that portion of the bank of French Creek from eroding. So it's important for us to preserve those types of properties.
So now when the property is preserved, that means if I'm a fisherman, I could go fishing there? I could launch my boat there? Is that what that means?
You certainly can, yes. Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about launching a boat later, because we're going to take a little trip on the creek later on and on a part that we haven't done before here on our Crawford County Outdoors series. But talk about this isn't the only property that the Conservancy manages, right?
That's right. So French Creek Valley Conservancy is an accredited land trust. We are a land trust. That's what we do. And we either own or conserve over 1,800 acres within the French Creek watershed. About 2/3 of that we have under what's called a conservation easement. And that means that the landowner retains their ownership rights of the property, but they've said, I'd like to put some protection. This property is special and it's worthy of conservation or protection, and so we have a deed, a conservation easement. There's a restriction on the deed that there won't be adverse development on the property, that it'll be preserved in its natural state.
Okay, so preserved in its natural state, that means me with my hunter's hat on, maybe there's going to be some deer there, maybe there's going to be some ducks or geese or rabbits or whatever it is that I'm hunting. So hunters, so I'm with you on that point before, that conservation, I think hunters and fishermen are conservation. I mean, they want the land to make more deer for them and to make rabbits and birds for them. And so
they really do. And the important thing for everyone to remember is that you can't have sportsmen out hunting, fishing, whatever, if there's no habitat for that wildlife. And our efforts in conservation are to be sure that that habitat continues. Our goal is to keep the waters of French Creek clean and clear because it's a very special waterway, but we do that by protecting the land throughout the entire French Creek watershed. And that property is also open for sportsmen to enjoy.
Okay, so now you probably spent more time on French Creek than I have. So what kind of things might we see when we're out paddling later?
Oh, there's an incredible diversity. There's so many species of fish. I believe more than 80 species of fish within the French Creek watershed. Our most famous creature probably is the hellbender, which is the second largest species of salamander in the world. These guys can grow to be 30 inches long and live to be 30 years old, except you're probably not going to see them, and you shouldn't go looking for them. They actually have a protected status, and so you're not able to go out and look for them. We also have an incredible number of freshwater mussel species. If you've spent a time along French Creek, you might have seen a lot of mussel shells on the bank. We actually have 3 times more species of freshwater mussels in French Creek than the entire continent of Europe. I mean, we've got a lot of these, and they are very special. Some of them are protected as well. And again, we might not see those while we're paddling, but they're a very important part of the biodiversity of the creek.
Okay, so if someone is hearing your talk and I'd like to help, what would they do?
Well, our biggest event every year where we engage volunteers is we have our annual French Creek cleanup. That's coming up the Saturday after Labor Day in September. Last year we had more than 750 volunteers come out and help us clean up the watershed. We collected more than 32,000 pounds of garbage across the watershed. And that's not to say we have that much garbage sitting in French Creek. We've actually reduced the amount of garbage within the creek so much that now we're working in tributaries and some of the other areas to clean up other parts of the watershed. But aside from that event, we have pop-up cleanup events. We actually had a cleanup event on our Lufers Landing property a couple weeks ago. We have people come in and help us in the office. We have lots of volunteer opportunities, and then you can always become a member of the Conservancy.
So the property that's protected, there's lots of them along. Is there a way that I can figure out that that's one of these properties when I'm traveling and I'm looking for a place to get to fish, or I'm looking for a place to hunt?
There are. We're actually in the process of redoing our website right now, but we do have access to information so people can see how they can access and use every one of our properties.
That's awesome. Okay, we're gonna hit the water here. Now we're gonna go to Cambridge Springs. There's an interesting part of the river there. We're gonna go past unfortunately the former location of the Riverside Inn, and we'll see some other interesting things. So Brian Pilarcik's going to join us from Crawford County, from the Crawford County, let's see, Watershed Management.
Watershed Manager.
I'm gonna have to ask him.
He's the Conservation District.
Okay,
yep.
Very good. Okay, okay. So stay tuned for that.
Brian Pilarcik joining us here on the creek. How's it going?
Pretty good, Duane. Pretty good.
So let me ask you some basic safety questions about. I'm going to take a trip on the creek. What do I need to be thinking about? With my kayak, and I mean, do I need to be with a bunch of people? Do I need to be by myself?
Some things. Well, it's best to paddle with other people. So it's not a great idea to paddle alone. If you're with a group, also having a plan in place when you're going to go paddle, and make sure that somebody that is not on the water has that plan, so that if something does go wrong, they know where you're at.
They're going to know where you're supposed to look for you if you did get in trouble.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And also all the personal safety equipment, whether it's your life jacket or a throw rope, whatever you're going to need for the day, and then environmental concerns, sunscreen, insect spray, water, all of those things are important as well.
And now we're out early, kind of early in the paddling season here, and it was at one point it was kind of sunny today, and now it's a little breezy. So I'm always one. It's like I just happen to have since I have my Crawford County logo on the show, I got my Crawford County Outdoors sweatshirt on. But I always tell people, wear something brightly colored, because if you do, someone is looking for you, right? I mean, they're going to have a better time finding you than if you're wearing your duck hunting clothes, right?
Exactly.
Hey, can you talk about this section of the creek a little bit?
Well, we're in the section of creek right now between Miller Station Road and Cambridge Springs that we'll be paddling today. Kind of a flatter section of the stream. Actually, as far as the geology goes, you might want to ask Brenda. This might be a better section for Brenda to mention.
When we have a piece of the creek like this that's got a lot of curves in, does that tell you that it's flatter? It's not that the water's not traveling as fast?
Right. This section of the creek is wider, slower, and much deeper. Some of the deepest sections of the creek are found within this area in Cambridge Springs. This is a really interesting area. If you can look at an aerial map or an aerial photograph of this section, there's tons of oxbows and old meander scars from where the creek was making its way through this area.
I know when I go to the ganglands, that's a little ways behind us here. Yeah, the creek comes in and out, people have said to me before, oh, if they don't want to get their feet wet. Well, I always hunt right on the edge, because I found the opposite to be true. I found that they like to be hiding, right where the cattails start,
This would be a good area for them, definitely.
Now, the water's a little bit muddy right now. We've had a lot of rain lately. Is that an issue that we just had some soil washed down? Is that why the water looks muddy?
We've received a lot of rain in the last 24 hours, very heavy rain, so it's not surprising that the creek is silty today. Sometimes later in the summer it can get very, very clear, but this
this would be a good time of the year to have our paddle trip, so we didn't have to walk and drag the boats.
Well, French Creek can be challenging because the water level can change pretty quickly. We saw the water level went up in the creek a couple feet overnight with the heavy rain we had last evening. So that can be really variable. And there can be a lot of times during the summer where the creek is actually too low to paddle. You can do almost as much walking as you are paddling. But we just keep an eye on the stream gauge and usually find good times to get out.
I've got some property, and it's along a creek. It's over in Warren County, but it's Conewago Creek, very similar to French Creek in a lot of ways. And I have some large trees, like I'm seeing here along the bank, that are right along the bank. And one fell into the river last year. So my wife's like, we got to get the timbering done so we don't lose any more trees. And I'm debating with myself. It's like, so are those trees holding back the bank, or should we be moving along and hurrying up with the timbering? What do you think?
Well, the trees alongside of the bank are definitely going to hold the soil in place. Trees and shrubs, their root systems will knit the soil in place, if you will. They actually hold the soil in place, especially shrubs. That's why shrubs are so important alongside of the bank. Trees do get tall, and trees get top heavy, and in saturated soils they can be susceptible to falling over in high water events, and then also during high winds. The key to dealing with trees alongside of the creek is if they fall in the creek, they're not doing any damage. Leave them be. They're fish habitat. If they're falling in the creek and they're eroding heavily behind them, you might want to think about trying to remove the treetops. So it's really kind of a case-by-case situation. It's not that it's all trees in the creek are good or all trees in the creek are bad. It's you really have to look at the situation, what kind of damage it's causing, what kind of benefit it has.
So let me ask you a kayaker question about that tree in the creek now. If I'm coming up to it, what do I need to be thinking about? How do I need to be planning, to get past it safely and all that?
Yeah, trees in the creek are called strainers. Like any strainer, water's going to go through it. Solid objects aren't. You're a solid object, so you're not going to go through it. Strainers are incredibly dangerous, especially in higher water events.
Because the water's the one to pull me down.
It wants to pull you down. It wants to get you stuck in it. The best thing to do with a strainer is avoid it at all costs. Move out of the way of it.
So if it's totally across the whole width of the creek, I need to stop and get out and take a little portage around that tree and then get back in.
Exactly. Safety is foremost when you're paddling. Don't take chances on them. A lot of people end up getting hung up in strainers, and they are one of the more dangerous things you're going to encounter on the water.
Now, why is it in some places, like right over here to your right there, I see that the soil is very much exposed, but then other places the greenery is right down to the water. What's the difference? What causes the difference there?
Well, these banks are pretty vertical in this area. They are going to slough off. The soils, soils are pretty muddy through here, pretty silty and clay. If you get enough moisture behind them, enough pressure from the water running past them, they can start to fall off. So if you see the more vertical banks are the ones that are bare, the ones that have a little bit of slope to them tend to have more vegetation on them.
So, Brenda, back in the day, 10,000 years ago back in the day, we wouldn't have been walking here, right? I mean, we wouldn't have been paddling or walking or anything around here, right?
We would have not have. Northwest Pennsylvania went through a number of times of glacial advances and retreats across northwest Pennsylvania. And actually, French Creek originally had flowed into Lake Erie, flowed to the north. And with those episodes of glacial advance, they blocked the flow of French Creek into Lake Erie. And so French Creek actually ended up reversing direction and flowing to the south as it does now. And actually, that's what makes French Creek so incredibly unique as far as its biodiversity, because the critters that live in French Creek come from a number of different habitats. The original headwaters were closer to Clarion, Pennsylvania, so there's biology included from that area. You have some animals that are from the Lake Erie biology that are still within French Creek. And then also now the creek flows into the Allegheny River at the city of Franklin. So there's the biology included from that area as well. So that's how you come to have such unique biodiversity in this waterway, because those three biologies came together.
Now, when the glacier came through, yes, it rolled up a bunch of stuff from Canada and brought it along or whatever, but we have a real green, I mean, everything seems to want to grow real well here. I mean, is that related? Is that a related point?
It is. So, I don't know how.
I mean, you see lots of those big old the granite rocks laying around that it's like, I've been told those got rolled here, in the glacier time, you're...
Right, so those are called glacial erratics. And those are rocks that have been brought down from the Canadian Shield.
So did we get all of Canada's topsoil too? Did we get all that too?
So there's a lot of geology that has been brought down from Canada that is not around here, and that all gets crushed up with the movement of the glaciers back and forth. There's a lot of limestone added to the area, so we have a lot of acidity from the limestone. That's part of what contributes to the good freshwater mussel population that we find in the creek. So yeah, those conditions for glaciation really contribute to what you see here today.
Now we're going to be going past here shortly the former location of the Riverside Inn. Would look different just a little over a year ago than it looks today.
Unfortunately, that's right. That's a real loss for the area. Big impact to the community of Cambridge Springs. There's a new owner and some new development plans there, and I hope that they'll be able to bring a new vibrant business to Cambridge Springs, but still preserve the memories that so many people have from many, many decades spent at the Riverside Inn.
I suppose those 100-year-old buildings, I mean, they're at risk of not surviving. At this point, I'm thinking of all the lost jobs and all the lost activity and so on. Something new coming, I guess that's good. That's a good thing.
It is good, but I think a lot of people have memories. So many people had proms and weddings and all those special events at the Riverside Inn, and I hope that people can support the new business coming in, but still hold on to those cherished memories.
I can think of, 3 wedding receptions I personally went to at the Riverside Inn there, yeah. And I think we had a high school class reunion there, if I remember right. We had that, yeah.
So Duane, when we were talking about the sediment in the creek and the trees along the bank, this is a good example over here where there's not trees stabilizing the bank over here. We're on the outside of a bend here, so this is where the erosion occurs on the outside of the bend in the creek, and you can see that that bank is actively eroding there.
Is it always going to hit the outside more than the inside of the curve?
It will.
Okay.
It will. You'll have greater water force on the outside of the curve, so you'll have erosion on the outside of the bend, and then usually deposition. You might find like a little gravelly bar on the inside of the curve.
In my backyard, it's kind of wet, and it seems like the moisture gathering up there isn't helping the ash trees. I know there's other issues with the ash trees that are going on. I had someone tell me once not too awful long ago that maybe plant maple trees, maybe that they're going to be okay to help dry up the soil a little bit more. What do you think?
Well, different trees are going to have different moisture tolerances. In general, you're going to want trees that like to grow in wet areas. The ash trees were hit by the emerald ash borer, and that's why we're losing most of our ash trees at this point.
I'm thinking that maybe it's getting wet because there's just less trees now because they're dying, from another reason and falling over.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, what should I be trying to replace them with?
So if you visit your county service forester, they can get you a list of trees that grow in wet areas, or your county conservation district. There's a lot of different trees that like to have their feet wet, that don't mind having their roots gets wet. And trees do transpire a lot of water, so they, a lot of times we'll hear folks that want to try to dry out an area. They think if they cut down the vegetation, it's going to dry it out. In reality,
It's
it
the
usually ends up
opposite that
making it
happens.
wetter because
Okay.
those trees are actually taking water.
Well, I'm seeing maple leaves here, but they're not like red maples or hard maples. It looks like they're those, what do you call them?
These are silver maples.
Silver maple?
Yeah, silver maples are on the wetter end of the spectrum. They're a facultative wet species, so they like to have their feet in more wet soil. These are good stream side tree, a riparian tree, where maples in general, the silver maples are going to like it a little bit more wet. Red maples they're generalists. They can handle wetter or drier soils. And then your sugar maples are going to want more dry soil.
I mean, used to be the concept of hemlock trees, around wet areas, but hemlocks are having some issues, aren't they?
There's a hemlock woolly Adelgid that is moving in through Pennsylvania. So that is a concern for us that we could start to see a decline. It's our state tree. The Canadian hemlock is our state tree, so it's a real concern. It's a beautiful tree. The interesting thing about hemlocks is they can take really dry soils in some areas. In our area, we tend to find them in wet areas. It's an interesting species.
So, Brenda, I've paddled on French Creek 100 times in my life. I don't know how many, a lot of times. I've never seen one of those hellbender things everybody talks about. Where do you find those things?
Well, so you haven't seen a hellbender because they don't want you to.
Okay, all right.
They really would rather not see you, and they don't want you to see them. Hellbenders actually have a protected status, and at this point you need to have a scientific collector's permit in order to go looking for hellbenders. You might come across one accidentally, but as far as going out to actively look for them, you need a permit in order to do that. Their preferred habitat, they like spaces under big, flat rocks. They have a very thin body, so they can fit underneath big, flat rocks.
So is it going to be like layers of rocks that you'll see, like sedimentary kind of rocks?
No,
or?
if you see a big flat rock the size of your kitchen table, that's the kind of place where a hellbender would like to get right underneath there and stay away from you.
Now, were they kind of digging their way in there, or are they looking for?
They just kind of burrow in there.
Okay.
Their bodies are very flat, and they actually breathe through their skin. And that's why they're a really good indicator species. The fact that we have hellbenders in French Creek is a good sign. That means we have good, clean, clear, quality water for them.
Well, that's the next question I wanted to ask you. It's like, I remember years ago, and all the industry in the area, it's causing pollution and so on. What's the status today?
French Creek really is in pretty good shape. There are certainly threats to the creek, and one of the greatest can be the sedimentation or the dirtying of the water. Like I said, the hellbenders breathe through their skin, so they need good, clean, clear water. We have thriving freshwater mussel populations, but we have a number of freshwater mussels that are threatened or endangered, and they are filter feeders, so they need clear water as well. So it's important to take measures to be sure that we're not adding additional sediment to the creek. Makes it difficult for some of those types of creatures to survive.
The funny thing is that two of the biggest pollutant threats to French Creek are actually excess water in the form of stormwater, and then also soil, which is a natural thing on the landscape as well. So sedimentation in the creek, and then excess water. When we think of pollution, we usually think of things like oil and gas and fertilizers and things of that nature. But too much sediment is not a good thing for the creek. Too much water is not a good thing for the creek. It causes damage.
I'm seeing construction stuff over there. Are we passing the Riverside location right now? I see a large excavation machine over there. It's in big piles.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
And I'm hearing some traffic, like I think we're coming up to the bridge maybe in a little bit here. Brian, let me ask you a related question to that about in the water. If I'm fertilizing my lawn, And I mean, can I overdo it, and can I cause problems down into the water?
You certainly can. Fertilizer, especially phosphorus in the water, that's a huge concern as far as pollution. Too much phosphorus in the water can cause algal blooms. It can cause an unbalance in the amount of aquatic plants that are growing. So when you're fertilizing, one of the most important steps you can do is doing a soil test. Your extension office, Penn State extension offices have soil test kits that can be sent out. Find out what your soil needs first, and then like anything else, make sure you read the directions and you follow the directions on whatever fertilizers that you are going to put on, and then also the timing of it. Knowing when to fertilize it's going to make the best impact, and making sure you're not doing something too close to a stream or too close to a lake to where the fertilizer is just going to run off into the water and end up fertilizing the waterway.
Now, I know when I read the bag, it says watch the forecast and make sure it's not going to rain within, I think it's 48 hours or whatever. When you put it, is that the point you're saying there?
So
don't
exactly
put it on right before
saying.
the rain, because it's all going to wash down into the stream.
Yeah, and fertilizers, it's expensive. You're spending your hard-earned money on it. The last thing you want to do is just watch it get washed away into a storm drain or right into a creek or a lake.
This may be the first time I'm seeing structures here. Now that we're getting close to town, are there a lot of cottages versus year-round homes along the creek, Brenda, or do we have both?
There's a mix. Yeah, it's interesting because there are quite a few towns located along the creek. So there are stretches where there are more year-round homes, and then some other stretches where there are more seasonal camps.
I think we're coming up to Route 19. One thing one thing I get a kick out of whenever I'm paddling on a creek is probably everybody in Crawford County crosses over French Creek, if not once a day, maybe once a week or more. And you don't even think about it. You think about, oh, this bridge is a little narrow here, I'm going over, whatever. You don't think about the unusual, unique thing that's underneath you there.
That's true. We spend a lot of time trying to educate people and talk about the value of French Creek. I think you're absolutely correct that most people drive across the creek or near the creek almost every single day and don't realize what a unique waterway it is. When I am talking to other people in our land conservation community, French Creek has national and international recognition for the unique biodiversity. And if you're just driving over the bridge every day on your way to work, you're not thinking about how special it is, but it really is an incredible waterway.
But my regular job at the hospital, I'll oftentimes get to tour new doctors around who are thinking about moving here. The first story I always tell them is, George Washington came through here, in 1753, and came up the creek, to talk to the French about, So to me, that's important to me. I think folks need to hear that story.
I agree. I don't think enough people know that story, and they don't understand the historical and colonial history of our region. We try to share that story as much as we can. Story goes that George Washington was actually the one that named French Creek when he visited the area to meet with the French at Fort LaBeouf near Waterford. Really interesting colonial history, and I just don't think enough people realize that.
And back in the day, your town needed to be on a creek because that's how you moved stuff around, right? I mean, there weren't roads all over the place. There wasn't a highway, there wasn't a train system and all that kind of stuff.
That's right. There was a lot of commerce and travel on the waterway, and there's a lot of history of canals and rerouting of the creek and its tributaries. It's interesting to look back and see where the original channeling of French Creek was, because it's been significantly relocated in some places. It played an important role, though, in a number of these towns throughout the colonial period and
I see a little rust on the bottom of the bridge there. I wonder if that means anything.
Don't think about it when you drive over.
Okay, all right. Now I hear lots of motors. We're in town. Seeing lots of buildings. I'm not sure about you guys, but if I can't get out in the water once in a while, that's kind of like part of life. Living near the water is a good thing for me, and just being near it's different than being out in it, on it, and doing things around.
Right. Well, I think, as you said, most people probably drive on or near French Creek every day. But if you put a boat in the water and you paddle just a few minutes out of any of these towns along the creek, pretty soon you don't realize where you are. You get into unpopulated places pretty quickly, and you can just have the most serene, enjoyable paddle and forget that you're just a few minutes outside of town.
Brian, how are we doing on? I go every year to the French Creek Cleanup Day in the fall, and in recent years, my group from the hospital will go up and clean up some of the creeks that actually caused a flood in the hospital a number of years ago, or just down the street from the hospital where, I haven't seen a shopping cart in quite a long time. I mean, how's it going? Is it better, than it had been years back?
I think there's a lot of awareness of litter. There's been a lot of historical litter was on the streams, and things like the French Creek Valley Conservancy have done with the annual cleanups have made great strides at trying to clean up some of that residual trash that's been around for years and years. I think we've done one on Pine Tuning Reservoir for a number of years as well, and what we see is that we don't see the older stuff. Some of it resurfaces, but we still do see the new stuff around, and that's the discouraging part, is that folks can carry stuff in, but it should be easier to carry back out, and if we can just get that ethic going, I think we can make strides. But overall, I think having more exposure by having the cleanups like the Conservancy has been doing, and having folks aware, ad campaigns, we're making a difference, but folks still have to have that ethic, and that's something we need to instill in our future generations.
I always enjoy that day seeing so many students out. Everything from grade school kids, all the way through high school, and Allegheny College kids, et cetera, et cetera. That to me is a good sign, that there's interest, and there's that they look at that as fun. I think that's what that means.
Yep.
We bring out people from 5 to 85, and it's amazing to me. Last year, I think we had more than 750 people registered to clean up on that day, and it's gotten to be such a popular event in the community. People are already calling us for this year, wanting to know, where are we going to be this year? Can we sign up already?
No, it's generally the Saturday after Labor Day, right?
It's always the Saturday after Labor Day.
Okay.
This year it is September 8th, and we will be at the Conservancy Fairgrounds for our garbage collection and weighing.
So where you bring your trash you picked up is down the Crawford to the fairgrounds, okay? Let me ask you guys an opinion question here. So if I'm out on the creek, and to me it's like a combination of fun, and I like seeing stuff out there, but it's an exercise thing too. So if I'm just going on the creek and I'm just kind of letting the creek push me along, and am I getting any extra? What do you think?
I think no matter what, you're using your core muscles because you're balancing the boat. You definitely, still get a little arm workout, even if you're paddling as slowly as we are now.
There's nothing else, you get in the fresh air.
That's right.
You want to race? Let's race.
It's amazing the increase in recreational kayaking over the last half a dozen years or so. It's just exploded, and people ask us all the time how many people are using the creek, and we don't have a way to gauge that, but we have water trail maps of the creek and the access points, and we give out an awful lot of those, and we get a lot of calls about people being interested in paddling on the creek. But it's important to be prepared, as Brian was saying. You want to be sure you know the conditions and you have what you need when you're paddling, because we have heard instances of people not being aware of how many miles it is till their takeout point, not having water with them. It is a river. It's It's an active river, and it's not to be trifled with.
That's
You certainly can get yourself in a dangerous situation.
That's a good point. If I leave from my house by car and I go to Cambridge Springs, it's 10 miles. If I leave from my house in Cambridge Springs and go back to my house, it's a lot more than 10 miles on the creek, right?
It sure is. It sure is, especially up in this area where the creek meanders back and forth so much. Your creek mileage is much higher than straight line.
Interesting. Now this bridge has kind of got a lot of concrete on. You can't tell if there's any rust or not there. That's
A lot of the bridges over the creek are being replaced or have been replaced in the last few years. So you're seeing fewer of those metal bridges and more of these bridges. It's a shame to see some of those historic bridges go, but certainly from an infrastructure standpoint, it might be for the best.
So I'm hearing some birds here. Any particular kind of bird that was that we were just hearing back there under the bridge?
I'm not great with birds unless they're waterfowl.
Okay.
I'm not a birder either.
Yeah.
It definitely wasn't a duck or a goose or a loon, anything like that. It was okay.
You know, we're fortunate so often when we're out paddling on the creek, we end up seeing bald eagles. And that is such a surprise when you tell other people that who aren't from this area how often we see bald eagles when we're out on the creek. But it really is quite common when we're out. But surprising to people who might not be from this area.
So I was a little bit practiced up for today. My wife and I went on paddling on Woodcock the other day, and we saw geese, we saw loons, we saw, now is an osprey, is that a type of eagle? So we saw osprey, and the one that's the most impressive was a heron.
Yes.
And I saw people fishing and they weren't catching anything, but I said, well, there's a good fisherman over there, pointing to the heron, there's the guy that's going to be the most successful fisherman out here today. Funny thing happened too. We were paddling along and I'm looking over here at the heron, and I must have got between a log and the shore, and a fish jumped in my lap.
Oh my
And then
gosh.
just at the other side. So I must have trapped him in a tight spot or whatever. And I'm like, oh, how about that? Okay.
That wasn't happening to the guys out fishing though.
I'm thinking that fish was hiding from the heron, because the heron was just on the one side of a little channel there, and yeah. So I must have trapped him. Must have got him pinned in a tight spot.
You can paddle French Creek, but a number of the major tributaries are navigable as well. We were just out paddling on Buck Creek and ran into quite a few herons there. And their wingspan is amazing. They're incredible birds.
Really something. Oh yeah, I agree.
There's 10 major tributaries within the French Creek watershed, and quite a few of those you can get out and enjoy as well.
Let me ask you a question about the creek. So everybody thinks of, okay, I think this is the first time on our outdoor show that we've done this Cambridge Springs part of the creek, which is really cool. This is fun. French Creek itself is 100 and something miles long, right?
117 miles
117
long.
miles?
The headwaters are up near Sherman, New York in Chautauqua County, and then it flows 117 miles from Chautauqua County, New York, through Erie County, Crawford, a little bit of Mercer, and down to Venango County, where it flows into the Allegheny River at the city of Franklin.
So now if you were to drive your car from Sherman, New York to Franklin, again, wouldn't be 117 miles.
It's not 117 miles.
Probably even in the neighborhood of maybe half of that, right? Yeah.
A lot of twists and turns in between. And you cannot paddle French Creek from one end to the other, unfortunately. There are some dams and other obstructions that would prevent you from doing that, but there is quite a bit of the creek that is navigable.
I see off to our left here some water coming in. I'm assuming that's like storm drains coming from town, since we're right at the very edge of
I
town
would
here.
think
Is that?
so.
It's storm drains or an outlet from something. I'm not sure what.
That's one thing that's changing a lot, just in my adult lifetime, is you hear politics-wise, drain the swamp, drain the swamp. There's a lot less draining of the swamps, actual draining of the swamps that goes on now. Now it's like when you're building something, if you're going to have water running off, you got to control that, not just put it down the downspout and put it down into the creek, right?
That is right. There's, there are stormwater plans in place for Crawford County, and associated with permitting, you do have to avoid wetlands. That's one of the things in Crawford County that we're very blessed with wetlands. There's a lot of wetlands here. For development, that's something that you have to work around, make sure that you're not impacting it. And one of the reasons why is what I mentioned earlier was the stormwater. Stormwater is one of the greatest pollutants into French Creek. It's one of the things that we try to prevent. Wetlands are really good at soaking up excess stormwater on the landscape. And when we fill them in, we add more water to the creek. When we add more water to the creek, it floods more often, and it also erodes the banks and causes damage to the creek as well.
Now, this past year, for the first time that I think that I can remember, Meadville experienced some flooding from the ice melting and whatever. Now, my theory was that with the temporary closure of Tamarack Lake, that was a contribution, in that. What do you think? What do you think was some of the things behind that?
Well, that ice dam was actually a combination of a number of things that happened. One was that the record snowfall up in Erie, so that was a lot of water potential coming into the creek. We had those warm temperatures, things melted, the ice started to break up on the creek, and it jammed up near Meadville, and unfortunately it stayed there until it finally was able to work its way loose. But the dams really wouldn't have played a whole lot of a part in that. It was a series of natural events that lined up to really cause that.
Another factor in that is keeping in mind that French Creek's path through Meadville now is not its original course through the city. When the railroad was put in downtown Meadville, French Creek, the main stem, was pushed over and really confined more to the western side of the valley. And if you looked at an air photo or a map of French Creek is pretty straight as it comes through the city of Meadville. And then just south of Meadville, there's some major meanders, natural curves within the creek. And with the ice jam this year, a lot of the ice got jammed up in those curves south of town, and the ice that was coming downstream was gaining speed on the straight raceway through Meadville itself, and then getting jammed up at those curves south of town.
I like your term, the raceway. I like it.
I think that ice jam was a humbling experience for a lot of folks. In 2018, we think we can solve just about anything. And, here we are as emergency managers and a lot of folks standing there looking at that and really no way to safely remove it. We're just at the will of nature to be able to let that break and let it go through. And it's a humbling experience to see what nature can do and really stay out of the way sometimes when it gets to that point.
I was born in 1959 in February, and when I was brought home from the hospital, I was told that the dynamite was happening because there was an ice jam near the family's home in Westmead Township, and so I was expecting that again this year, but I guess there was a decision not to do that, which understandable.
Know about it, but it was interesting. We were getting some calls and some questions at the Conservancy asking our opinion of when we thought the water would go down, and well, whenever it wants to. Definitely not something anyone could control.
Right off to your right there's another one of those silver maples we were talking about. That looks like it's growing at about a 45-degree angle. To me, it's like a tree that's growing at 45-degree angle is going to fall over, That one looks like it's hanging on pretty well. You see lots of roots there. Is that going to fall? Or
it's absolutely amazing how well these trees can hold on. If you look both sides of the bank, up and down the banks at these trees, they're holding on one-sided, and they will hold on for a very long time that way. It's gonna take the soil washing around the back sides of it, killing the roots on the other side to really be able to make that come down. So it's surprising how long they can actually hold on with just that one side of the roots.
That looks like a willow tree there. Well, that's even more than 45-degree angle there. That one is, and it looks like it's not doing so well. Do the willow trees like the water? Are they?
Yes, willow trees
okay.
are one species that, as a broad paintbrush, you can paint them as a water-loving tree. They like to have their feet wet, like to have their roots wet. It's more that they have adaptations that allow them to grow in wet environments. I said have their feet wet, but it's their adaptations that allow them to grow in that saturated soil. Nature allows for things to grow in all kinds of different environments, and these are adapted to this environment.
What's with the bank there over to your right? It looks like some reinforcement there.
Yeah, so that's our stream banks that are a stabilization project alongside of that roadway.
Okay.
Boy, I feel like I heard the story behind that, but I don't. We'd have to ask our permit folks what that was, because I seem to remember that from a staff meeting, but I don't remember exactly what happened there. And I wonder if that's the section. Is that McClellan Street there? So that could be what's going on with why proposed.
I know I was helping out up at the Meadville Area Recreation Complex, and they had some volunteers helping reinforce the bank of, what stream is that? Is that the start of?
It's Mill
Run?
Mill Run.
Okay. And it's a little different than that, but it's I think eventually as the plants that they planted in amongst the reinforcement grow up, you won't even realize that it's there.
Yeah, a lot of there's different types of stream bank stabilization. One is to hard armor the banks, putting rock alongside of it. That's a real traditional way of trying to stabilize a stream bank. Not always the best way to stabilize a stream bank, because when you armor one side, usually what happens is the water starts to push against another side and cause damage. So those types of stream stabilizations, they're actually trying to move the water with the rock and move the energy away from the bank, and then reinforce it with the plantings. And the idea is eventually the plantings will take the primary role of stabilizing the banks, and the hard armoring will be a secondary stabilization.
It just seems like a few minutes ago we were right in town, and then boom. Now we see nothing here.
Nothing but nature now.
Yeah. Like I said, you paddle out of town, and very quickly you get to a quiet, serene setting.
Let me ask you guys the question that I'm sure a lot of our Crawford County Outdoors viewers are going to want to know is, what kind of fish can I find if I'm an avid fisherman here? What kind of fish can I find in Crawford County in the French Creek in different parts? Is it different?
So it's for the most part, French Creek is a warm water fishery. So you're going to find warm water species in it. You're going to find smallmouth bass. It's an excellent smallmouth bass fishery. Walleye, catfish, muskie. It depends on what section you're on and what you're actually fishing for. But those would probably be the primary species that people would be fishing for. And it's an exceptional fishery.
I think I've heard more than 80 species of fish.
Yeah.
Just as I'm asking that, Brian, something was hitting the surface over there on off to your right. So okay. Wanted to get in on the talk, yeah, I guess.
Had something to say. Duane, there are threats to that exceptional biodiversity that the French Creek does have. There's over 80 species of fish, 26 different species of freshwater mussels. Several of them are federally endangered, but there's a number of threats to the creek that are happening right now, and invasive species, whether they're plants, whether they're fish, whether they're invasive mussels, zebra mussels, the round goby is threatening the creek. Those things could have a pretty detrimental effect on both the paddling experience as well as the fishing.
Well, let me ask you a question. If I've had my boat in some other place, what do I need to do to protect the creek if I'm coming to French Creek? Do I need to wash it off with Clorox? What do I need to do?
So the most important thing to do if you're going to be moving from one waterway to another is it's clean drain, dry. So you make sure that you clean your equipment, and that's not just your boat. That's your sandals, that's your life jacket,
Okay.
that's your paddle.
Okay.
Drain. Make sure you're draining any water that's standing in the boat, because even a little tiny bit of water can hold, say, zebra mussel, the veligers from zebra mussels. They can be transported that way.
Even if it's a couple of weeks, or
They can last for a couple of weeks at times.
Okay.
Some plants can completely dry out, and when they rehydrate, can actually establish themselves. The other thing is for anglers, bait buckets. Bait buckets are a primary way that you can introduce species such as the round goby, and that's probably how they ended up in LaBeouf, Lake LaBeouf, and then on into French Creek. They could really be a significant impact on French Creek. For one thing, they eat smaller mussels. So our native mussel species can be impacted by the round goby just by consumption. They outcompete our native darters, so that amazing biodiversity that we have with our native species could be threatened by the round gobies. That really could have a ripple effect all the way up through the food chain, all the way up to the game species that we enjoy so much. So making sure that you clean, drain, dry your boat. Either drying it completely. You can run it through a car wash. You can use things like chlorine, but there's methods for doing that. And, Pennsylvania Sea Grant actually has a great website where you can look up that information, find out exactly how to clean and disinfect your gear. But being vigilant on making sure that you're cleaning, draining, and drying.
Brian, I've seen some grapevines over here. Is that a bad thing?
Grapevines are a native species, so it depends on if you're trying to have timber improvement. You might not want a lot of grapevines in a timber stand, but as a native species, they're not really going to impact the ecosystem. In fact, they provide an important food source as well as habitat.
I was on this stretch of creek once a long time ago, but it seems very different. In fact, I wouldn't even, from what I'm used to, and the more southern part of the creek, it really looks a lot different.
Yeah, this is a very different part of the creek. As you move to the south, the character of the creek changes significantly, and it's very interesting. If you've only paddled the upper reaches and never been to the southern portion of the creek, it is very different. There are certain sections where you might have a little more exciting paddle. This is pretty wide, deep, flat water, but there's other sections where you could have a little white water on a good day for some excitement. And there's some beautiful stretches where the hemlocks line the creek. But the character changes a lot from north to south.
Well, we certainly have a good day. After the storm yesterday, we're having a good day here today. So, well, we're almost to the takeout point. I certainly want to thank you guys for your help and all my dumb questions here that you're answering. So,
Thank you.
Brenda Costa from the French Creek Conservancy, right?
That's right.
Duane Pilarcik. Now, I don't want to say it wrong. From the Crawford County Watershed.
Crawford County Conservation District.
Crawford County Conservation District. Well, thanks, guys, for being with us. Also, thanks to the folks at home for joining us today on Crawford County Outdoors. We'll talk to you next time.